The Chinese believed that all parts of the universe were interrelated. They spoke of the body as if it were a landscape. Acupuncture points were given names like bubbling spring, penetrating valley, great mountain stream. So it followed that they saw a landscape as if it were a human body. The mountains were the bone structure. The soil was the skin. Rivers were blood vessels. One should respect the earth as if it were one's own body. Some places on earth, as on the body, had special power. These places were like acupuncture points on the body of the earth. The first brick pagodas in China, for all the world like acupuncture needles, were placed in one of these special points in Henan province. They believed the most favorable place to build a temple or a tomb was the point where the flow of energy in the earth was best balanced and therefore most powerful. Finding a good site to build a monument became an art, the art of feng shui. In communist China, it's now frowned on. But when the authorities reconstruct a temple, they take care to see that the original alignment is not altered. Some points on the map are said to have very good feng shui. This tree down the road from the temple has lived for more than 2,000 years. They say it's very well sited, just south of a great mountain. It shelters the students of China's oldest school, the Songyang Academy. For most of the last 1,500 years, pupils have been taught science and philosophy on this site. If a Westerner had been taught 1,000 years ago that the Earth had invisible lines of force underneath the surface, it's likely he wouldn't have believed it. But as it happens, the Chinese were right. The Earth does have invisible lines of energy. And they're explained today in every classroom in China. We call them magnetism. The Chinese conceived of the idea of force lines in the Earth long before they proved their existence with magnets. But the concept fitted into their cosmology perfectly. South was yang, north was yin, another pair of balanced opposites. The West had known that some metals were naturally attractive, the lodestone, for example. But it took the Chinese to realize the directional properties of the magnet. They invented the compass 100 years before the Europeans. Magnetism was one example of the living energy of the Earth. But were there others? Indeed there were. If the Earth was a body, with rivers like arteries and magnetic lines like acupuncture meridians, then it followed that the Earth, like a body, could get ill, out of balance. But how could you tell when this was happening? Chinese peasants have always been close to the Earth and to their animals. Chinese scientists have always noted down natural phenomena. Eventually, a connection was made between the strange behavior of animals and the occurrence of natural disasters. To this day, herds of deer are monitored. If they're off their food or unusually nervous, an earthquake may be imminent. Herds of deer provide just one example. Other people note the laying habits of their chickens, the level of their wells, the curious cries of foxes out of season. This is a village schoolmaster. If his family notices anything unusual, he'll contact the local office of the Bureau of Seismology. It may be the crucial first sign of a coming earthquake. He will also check simple instruments in his cellar, measuring the Earth's tilt and the temperature of the ground. It'll all be noted down. Only in China is society sufficiently organized to correlate this kind of information. 24 hours a day, duty officers stand by for calls from people like that schoolmaster and put together the clues that may predict an earthquake and forewarn them of disaster. When an unpredicted quake hit the coal mining city of Tangshan in 1976, the effects were appalling. Nearly 500,000 people killed or injured, some drowned, some trapped, some crushed to death. It's no surprise that the Chinese have traditionally respected the living forces of the earth. But why wasn't this earthquake predicted? Perhaps it was because there were so few peasants living in Tangshan. It's a mining town. A year before, the Haicheng earthquake had been predicted to the nearest 24 hours, and the entire population evacuated. The peasants had warned the authorities of strange animal behavior 10 months beforehand, and helped to prevent another disaster. The Beijing Seismic Center covers the Tangshan region. As it happens, a 5.2 tremor on the Richter scale had been recorded here shortly before we filmed. The first steps they took were to see if anyone was hurt. Then the epicenter was plotted and the complete details recorded in case there were aftershocks. On this occasion, happily, no damage was done.
哎，地震局吧，我值班室啊，报一数据啊，刚才14点28分05秒。
This building houses the Chengdu Regional Seismology Bureau in the southwest. Clerks sift through a mountain of reports received every day by post. The routine seismograph readings, the temperature of the ground, the behavior of the deer and the chickens. From this information, they can begin the careful job of prediction. It's as if these seismologists were taking the pulse of the earth, noting down its bodily signs, deducing its health from the way it looks. This patient work, like that of a careful doctor, may mean hundreds of lives saved. As in medicine, prevention is better than cure. Of course, this work also entails a staggering bureaucracy. All the records are annotated and then kept. They've been doing this for a very long time. On the wall is a map showing earthquakes as circles. Green circles mark older ones, going back as far as 700 BC. Orange circles mark earthquakes since 1900. Keeping track of all this information since the time of the Han Dynasty has been a very large task. It's perhaps not surprising that the Chinese invented paper, because they certainly invented the idea of a civil service. This committee would not have been out of place in Confucian times. It has been engaged for 4 years on compiling the definitive historical encyclopedia of Chinese earthquakes over the last 2,700 years.
郡国27，这都是属于就是没有确字的，没有确字的。
他书上就这么笼统一句话，哎，你就现在不好确证。
The Chinese became wise because they committed things to paper in the past. Indeed, printing was used early on for popular almanacs and encyclopedias, both in classical Chinese and in the frontier languages. The civil service was quick to pick up the new inventions of paper and printing. By controlling what was printed, they could control the curriculum of education and decide who learned what. In the field of seismology, there's an unbroken record of almost 3,000 years of Chinese scholarship.
这个很好一个，这个是墓碑。
这是道光30年
8月。
跟那个地跟刚才第一张是一个地震。
这个内容不一样啊，就是说这个人呢，地震震死的，他地震震死的。地震打死的，所以咱们这个道观。
Once again, in this field, the Chinese led the world technically as well as intellectually. They invented the world's first seismoscope in 132 AD, and a reconstruction of it is on view in Beijing. Since all science was in the service of the emperor, the motif is a dragon with a ball in its mouth. It's still not clear exactly how this machine worked, but in principle, below each dragon's head was a frog with its mouth open. If an earthquake happened to the south, then the south-facing dragon dropped its ball into the frog's mouth. Apparently it worked very well. But the Chinese cosmos had three parts, not only man and the earth, but the heavens. This is the oldest surviving observatory in China, completed in 1276 AD in Henan province. When the sun shone through the central window, it would cast a rectangular shadow. The lower the sun, the longer the shadow on the measuring block. At this observatory, the length of the year was calculated to 4 decimal points, 365.2425 days. Very accurate indeed. Until the 14th century, Chinese technology was superior to European in almost every field. Their instruments particularly were exquisite. These are bronze armillary spheres, used to observe, calculate and record the position of the stars in each constellation. Each star was like an acupuncture point in the body of the sky. Invisible lines of force joined stars into constellations. The sky was like a body. The links between heaven, earth and man were as yet unbroken. But here lay the downfall of classical Chinese science. Many cultures have considered celestial events to be ominous if they're hard to predict. Solar eclipses, for example, or the arrival of comets. But the Chinese considered the cycles of heaven and earth to be inextricably bound up with those of man. A major illness in the sky, a solar eclipse perhaps, meant a political or military catastrophe was inevitable. Astronomy was forever bound up with astrology in the public mind, and that, especially in the Cultural Revolution, made it deeply suspect. The traditional links between heaven, earth and man fell foul of modern science and politics. You couldn't prove them scientifically, and they weren't useful politically. It was far more practical to fire lasers at a satellite than to worry about the influence of distant constellations. China is not a rich country. The authorities feel they can no longer afford any science that is superstitious or speculative or even too theoretical. Hence the attraction of lasers. The forces of the cosmos must be made to work for their living in the new China. Energy isn't something that vaguely infuses the universe. It's what cuts through fabrics. Lasers are one of the 8 scientific areas given special priority since 1978. The others are agriculture, energy, computers, space, new materials, high-energy physics, and genetic engineering. All very practical. The Chinese have become good at growing crystals, too. This sort of science is worth the investment. But modern science has not always been so popular in communist China. Countless scientists were humiliated, beaten up, or sent to the fields during the 10 long years of the Cultural Revolution. Most science was seen as Western, decadent, un-Chinese. This is a laser tokamak device in Shanghai, part of the worldwide research into nuclear fusion. This kind of experiment would have been impossible during the Cultural Revolution. The search for nuclear fusion is practical in one sense. It could solve China's energy problems overnight. But the experiment may never be perfected, at least not at the Institute of Physics in Beijing. Here they're also working on fusion like their colleagues in Shanghai, but with less success. Chinese science slipped back 10 years under the Cultural Revolution. But that can't be blamed for everything. Still today, there's too little cooperation between the different academic institutes in China. Scientists in Beijing may have no idea what the people in Shanghai are doing. And, as in the West, a high proportion of money for science is spent on defense. Under the Cultural Revolution, spending on defense was one area that was not cut. In the 1960s and 70s, China triumphantly exploded its own atomic bombs. It was heralded as a massive achievement, which for a poor country it was. But at what cost?
Exploded an atom bomb in the western region of China on October 16, 1964, and thereby successfully conducted its first nuclear test. The success of this test was due to the hard work and the great coordinated efforts of China's workers, engineering, technical and scientific personnel, and all working personnel engaged in building up China's national defenses, as well as...
This is another victory for Mao Zedong's thought. The final decisive battle will be won at close combat at 100 or 200 meters. At that time, it will depend on who is tougher, who can take a position, who can hold it, who dares to see red on his bayonet. We have the spiritual atomic bomb, which is impossible for the enemy to acquire, and we also have the material atomic bomb. No enemy can defeat it. If the imperialists dare to introduce war on our head,
the Chinese have made extraordinary advances in this century. When the first aeroplane appeared in the sky over China, it was still a feudal state, ruled by a dragon emperor. It is difficult to realize how far their understanding of science has come in the last 75 years. Great efforts still have to be made to convince the average Chinese that practical science is not essentially foreign. Here, students are being acclimatized to the altitudes of Tibet. That sort of science has a clear purpose. But the Cultural Revolution is hard to forget. For 10 years, clever people were pilloried. Many of them still take care not to appear too clever today. And what was once the pride of China, the world's first civil service, has become a vast bureaucracy that's proving difficult to cut back. Red tape in the world of science is enormous. It's impossible to get rid of senior people, even if they're incompetent. China's greatest hope lies in its teachers. Only they can persuade the young to believe in science and not to be too careful and cynical. Happily, China has a great tradition of respect for teachers. That respect has lasted 1,500 years at the Songyang Academy.
知道这早，你三个人走路，说你假如说其中我不知道，他知道，他能解答这个问题，这都是我的老师啊，孔子，三人应在必有我师门，这点也就是那种意思，是吧？你不管你生意在我前也好，生意在我后也好，是你只要是比我懂得知识多。
For 1,300 years, China has had a centralized examination system. Today, in addition, the syllabus and timetable for every school are handed down from Beijing. What they teach in China is certainty. The Chinese say, have always said, that you only learn something by reciting it or doing it over and over again until suddenly you understand it. A student of wushu or kung fu is taught to learn by imitating, by doing. Only then, eventually, will he feel the vital energy of the universe, qi, running through his body. Watch it, then do it, then understand. Here at the Temple of Shaolin, the art of Kung Fu was first practiced. It is still being taught in the same way, still being perfected. Outside the Temple of Shaolin are the gravestones of the monks who have taught Kung Fu over the past 5 centuries. They are still revered for their wisdom. It is impossible to tell whether the long history of Chinese thought, of ancient beliefs in qi or yin and yang, of deep respect for the teacher, whether all this will make it easier or harder for them to cope with the problems of the future. But it is clear that their understanding of life on Earth is still profoundly influenced by their history.
We've just had a glimpse of a scientific legacy far different than that of the West. But a century and a half ago, many Chinese saw that their nation was far behind the West. And so they began a quest to borrow from abroad to supplement their own scientific legacy. That quest continues today. Stanley Loveman, can China cope with the technological revolution now sweeping the world?
Well, the 1980s showed that although the Chinese became very interested in bringing about transfers of technology, they found it far more difficult to absorb the technology and apply it to Chinese circumstances. The whole process of importation of technology has been a very difficult one for the Chinese. For one thing, very often feasibility studies are not done in order to show, to demonstrate how the new technology would fit into the Chinese economy. Often Chinese managers would rather buy a machine that incorporates a technology than the actual process of technology that might be involved, because of course he can't see the process. Also, sometimes the Chinese have been reluctant to invest in training personnel in order to how to use the new process.
How much does the political system, which is a repressive one, inhibit the development or the application of technology, which after all requires a certain degree of freedom and flexibility and imagination?
Well, it's not, the political system as manifested in the bureaucracy is one that makes it very difficult to reach rational decisions about the importation, about the choice of technology and how to import it. Also, the political system is one that has tended to disguise to Chinese managers that technology transfer is not just a process of transferring a bundle of documents, technical drawings. That is, more fundamental changes in the way people think about work and technology are required. To give an example, in the mid-1980s I was in Shanghai with a client looking at a pump factory. The manager of that Chinese factory clearly thought that the foreign technology would make the manufacture of pumps more efficient. He took us into the factory to show us the factory, took us to a machine on which a worker was sleeping and continued to sleep while we discussed the particular machine. Now, unless labor rules change and attitudes of labor and management in China change, whatever technology, advanced though it might be, is imported is not going to be able to raise the efficiency of a factory in which workers have the so-called iron rice bowl and are not motivated by the same kinds of incentives that has made advanced technology work in the factories of modernized countries.
In the 1990s, what difficulties do you foresee in China's continuing effort to import advanced Western technology?
The foreigners have been quite reluctant to export advanced technology to China because until the early 1990s, there was not a system in place to protect their intellectual property. So that in the late 1980s, the Chinese were copying Mickey Mouse without asking Walt Disney, and were copying M&Ms with a candy called W&W without asking the manufacturer. Foreigners are not going to export their technology until they're convinced that the Chinese copyright and patent system will protect their interests.
Thanks very much. Next time, in our final segment, our experts will talk about the challenges China faces as it approaches the 21st century.